Hello, this is Mark Lieberman, bringing you the world according to Mark on WPVM FM LP, broadcasting on 103.7 FM. And my guest today is Jeff Ward. Jeff is coming to us from Geneva, Illinois. I think that's the name. Am I correct,
It is.
Jeff? Okay. Thanks for being on the show today.
Well, thanks for having me.
So Jeff is here to talk about himself a bit, but he came to my attention because of a book that he's written that's been published with the intriguing title, "So You Want to Win a Local Election," which I guess you ripped off "So You Want to Be a Millionaire," or maybe they ripped it off from
I didn't even think of that. In fact, I was going to call it something completely different. And the sheriff I got elected here in Kane County found a book with that title and I had to change it. I don't recall what the original one was going to be, however.
Pride and Prejudice. In any event, let's introduce you to our audience, and let me give a brief intro. They say, it has been said, all politics is local. So the element of the local fits into your book, into what you've written about. This book, "So You Want to Win a Local Election," which we're going to talk about, is more or less a soup to nuts. I don't know if people understand that analogy anymore, but it's a soup to nuts.
Oh, I think they still do.
They still do. Okay. For anyone who is interested in local politics and becoming, or perhaps not becoming after they read your book,
Yep.
a politician on a local level, winning office, and you go through it all. So I'm going to quote something from the foreword of your book, which is, "Who the hell is Jeff Ward and what qualifies him to write a book on how to get elected to local office?"
Yeah, well, Jeff, it's one of those bizarre things, Mark. I actually invented a product called the Lapinator. It was a portable insulated laptop desk. And I took it to number 2 in the market, which apparently is a real rarity. And somehow in the middle of that, I decided to email the editor of a local newspaper in regards to some kerfuffle over the Plan B pill, which we're still having those kerfuffles today in a pharmacy. And he printed the email without asking my permission. And I joked with him, "Greg, tell you what, I won't sue you if you let me write a few guest views." And he said, "Go for it." So I wrote 3 guest views for the Kane County Chronicle. That led to being hired by the Aurora Beacon News, which was then owned by the Sun-Times. And I wrote for the Sun-Times suburban papers for 8 years as a freelance opinion columnist. Throughout that time, one can't help but cover politics. And there's more to write about than there is to, there's so much you can't possibly write about it all. So I covered a ton of elections. And, the print media media depression finally took its toll on the newspapers. I went off on my own. I worked for the county clerk for 1.5 years. And let me tell you, if you want to learn how elections work for your local county clerk. I mean, it was the kind of, lesson instruction that simply can't be matched. Then I left there and kind of stumbled into campaign managing, which I've done. I'm discovering it's a younger man's game, but I've managed to build a 75, 80% winning track record, in large part because I won't take on candidates who can't win. I won't take their money. So for 15 long years, May 24th, 2006, my first column ran for the Beacon News. I've covered politics.
So your comment a moment ago about you won't take on folks that are not likely to benefit from or even listen to what you have to say. So
it's even more than that, though. Sorry, Mark. It's
go ahead.
There's some people that just can't win. They don't have what's necessary. There's either an imbalance in the district. They're they're white, they're not white. They're male, they're female, they're gay, they're not gay. And so I have unless they want me to set them up for a second or third run, I have a hard time taking people's money if I can't get them close.
Okay. So I was going to say it's a little bit like the lawyers who are very selective about what cases they take on, and they take on those that they know they have a good chance of winning, and that
Correct.
reflects itself in their success rate. But 80%, you can't take anything away from that if that's been your experience in terms of the elections that you've been involved in. Okay. So having said all that, let's talk a little bit about the book, but you have an extensive table of contents. In fact, looking at the table of contents, if you read the table of contents, you pretty much have a good idea of, what the concepts are. But when I said take from soup to nuts, I think the soup part of it is, do you really want to be a person who runs for local office? And then I need you to talk about what local really means.
Sure, I wholeheartely agree. Again, the book is written in an outline format. At first, it looks overwhelming because it's 410 pages, ish. It's 8 by 10. The print's a bit bigger than most paperback books, but you don't have to read from page 1 to page 410. You can read the section on signs. You could read the section on messaging. You could read the section on getting your spouse on board, and so the table of contents is more actually like an index. So, and that helps the reader go from, get to where they want to go. There are overarching themes throughout the book, but you don't lose that much reading a chapter or, a section in a chapter.
Well, having said that, and again, I don't mean to interrupt, is I think the listeners would be very greatly informed if you talk to some extent with some context about who should be running, because you have a chapter there. Obviously, it's the first chapter is these are the right reasons to run. These are the wrong reasons to run. And that might be a good jumping off point for you to talk about.
Yeah. And by the way, you made a good point. Local to me is anything up to state rep, at least that's what we call them in Illinois, and state Senate. Once you get to the statewide level and the national level, politics is no longer politics. And we're seeing that play out in Trumpism versus the old Republican way, et cetera, et cetera. But that's what I think of a local election. And, a funny story, like one of my wife's best friends at the school, a counselor, decided she wanted to run for Congress. And so she called me and said, I want your book. I said, Congress right off the bat? So she read the book from start to finish and called me and goes, I'm not going to run for Congress. So that was $100 well spent because it saved her months of work trying to raise cash. I mean, making mistakes when she realized, maybe I'll start a little lower. So that's kind of what you and I were talking about. But, you shouldn't run if you're doing it for you. And that's really to boil it down, to distill it. It's when you run, it's all about the voter. And if you can't get past that, and some of the reasons not to run they are pretty funny. It's my turn. The party asked me to. If the party asks you to run, you're not going to win. Because if somebody could win that seat, they wouldn't have to ask somebody to do it. If you have a sense of self and you can, take the slings and arrows of outrageous political fortune, it's tough. Some of these, I covered a water reclamation district race, in an affluent neighborhood out here, although I go affluent, not affluent. And I mean, there was like fist fights between neighbors. So you really have to be ready to deal with people kind of coming at you. It's not negative campaigning. It's their supporters attacking you on Facebook, sending letters. I mean, it could get so far out of hand. And then, a candidate I know used to take her daughters around to knock on doors, but people have gotten so bitter about politics that the daughters go, we don't want to go anymore. If you knock on a door and a voter starts going at you because you're not the right party, you're not the right color, you're not the right whatever, you have to be able to politely back away slowly. Because if you get into a fight with a voter, they're going to put it on Facebook, and Mark, it's going to go from there. So, you really have to be ready to spend a lot of time, have the right message. Oh, and if you don't have and money, and if you don't have money, you have to spend even more time.
Well, let me just stop you for 1 second again before,
Sure.
because you're making a clear distinction between what constitutes local from your standpoint and what's above that. I just want to note from what I've seen in terms of looking nationally and looking here in North Carolina and some of the other contiguous states, there are a lot of people that jump from having zero experience as a politician, as a business person, not lawyers. Some of them haven't gone to school. We have a fellow here who
Oh, it's the
ran,
same way in Illinois.
and the fellow had zero experience, but he won, and he's a congressperson. He's much vilified, Madison Cawthorn. I don't mind mentioning it, but he had a
Yep.
lot of support from the Republican Party. He had a couple things going for him. He looked nice. He had an unfortunate accident, but he was totally unqualified, and he won. And I don't know the credentials or background for Marjorie Taylor Greene from Georgia, who's gotten a lot of attention. But based upon what I hear from her, she doesn't look like she had any experience. So some people that you talk to may be so impatient, they don't want to work on the local level. They think it's too Mickey Mouse. It's not important enough. You presumably would say you're looking at it incorrectly. You got to
Much as my wife's friend, exactly. I mean, and we have, Lauren Underwood here in Illinois, my congressperson is very similar and not a terribly effective governor, not a terribly effective congressman. We had people running that have never had their political experience is like being appointed to something. But the thing is, we have become so polarized and politically that now it's simply a matter of if you fit the suit. Remember that Brady Bunch episode where Greg fit the suit to be, the next rock star? That's what we've come down to on the national level. So yeah, you don't get people. You used to be you ran locally, then you tried state senate or state rep, which is still locally. Then you might try statewide, and then you might try nationwide. Barack Obama is actually a pretty good example of that. There's nothing. Community organizer is a tough thing, because if you're going to run for local office, you better be a community organizer, or you're going to come in last. So yes, this is one of those cases where, the basic political theories in the book apply everywhere, but running for a statewide or local office, except in the most homogenous states, is a totally different proposition these days.
So is that to say that from the standpoint of a local office holder or running for a local office, that one of the advantages and also one of the challenges is to know intimately what the electorate is for the particular office that you're seeking, and you have to appeal directly to that demographic as opposed to a wider demographic such as the state or even a big region of the state where it might be more complicated?
No, absolutely. My general district out here in Geneva is still very Republican, and I did get a Democratic sheriff and a Democratic state's attorney elected, but it took a lot of work. It took unique strategizing, and it took two great candidates. The state's attorney has gone on to disappoint me, but that still, she was a great candidate. And again, you and I had a small conversation beforehand, and I think the core difference is most of us have met our aldermen or at least talked to them. We've met our mayor or talked to them, even in a city the size of Asheville. I mean, here in Elgin, 108,000, the mayor does walk before COVID, walk with the mayor, and anybody could join him for walks around certain neighborhoods. You might even get your state rep or your state senator or a candidate for those offices knocking at your front door and asking for your vote. You don't get US senators. You don't get congressmen doing that. And you certainly don't get presidential candidates doing that. So locally, the big advantage is people know you and they expect more from you. So and when I say it's an advantage, you're generally not going to get knocked out by a grand pandering political gesture that can, that can kill you. I mean, Matt Gaetz, that can kill you at the national level. But it's also hard work. And what most folks don't understand is we just had a township, Elgin Township commissioner race. And one of the opponents took his challengers, one of the contenders took his challenger's criminal history, put it on a mailer and sent it out, and not only did I do a column on that, because that's just BS, but it totally backfired and the other guy won. Going negative in local elections rarely rarely works.
That's interesting because it seems to work exceedingly well on the national level. In fact,
It does.
Some of the candidates running and being elected and being reelected, their whole platform is negative. Some people are arguing today, and we're not going to get into partisan politics, although it's hard to avoid that with this topic. But there's some people that contend that the entire GOP non-platform is an example of it being totally negative. The Democrats are socialists. The Democrats are Marxists.
Before he got COVID, Bill Maher in real time, or at least on one of his shows, and I like Bill Maher, but sometimes I get, you need that grain of salt. But he talks about that what Americans fear the most, what's wrong with America. And like number 2 was other people. And that's where we are right now. It hasn't quite filtered down to the local level. But when you think, progressives are Satan, or you think Tea Partiers are inherently evil, it incites this kind of rabble-rousing, visceral hatred for the other side that allows people to take advantage of that thing. But as you and I know, Mark, I mean, we've been alive for a while. It never lasts forever. But we're, with Trump fomenting it even now, it's at the height. But it doesn't boil down to local politics.
So let's get back to your book. For those just tuning in, we're talking to Jeff Ward. He's an author and he's a political consultant. He's had a lot of experience in politics and helping other people get elected.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the question, again, just to go back to it, and then we'll move on to other parts of your book. When somebody decides or thinks that they want to run for office, and if they're having a conversation with you, or they could be just reading the book, and if your book is didactic, you can read the book as selected portions, as you said earlier, or cover to cover. And you can ask yourself, why am I running? What are the good grounded reasons for running? And give a couple of examples of, again, what is the wrong reason to run?
The best reason is because this city, county, state, district has been good to me and I want to give back. The next best one is, look, I've raised my family here. This is a great place to do that. I want to see that all the other families have the same successes that my family has had. I have the experience to do the job, and then you list what you've done. It can be, I have some new ideas. In national politics, you don't want to say what your ideas are, but in local politics, it matters. And look, we have this issue with crime, garbage collection, right down to wastewater issues. And I think I'm the person that can solve those problems. Those are the good ones. The bad ones are, again, the party asked me to run. If they can't get someone to run, that's because nobody can win, and they want you to just, in the book, I call it cannon fodder. Hey, it's my turn. No. Now, a guy actually used this in a commercial, I think in Louisiana. My wife wants to get me out of the house. Now, some people have said it and meant it. This gentleman used it as a campaign thing, and it was actually a pretty funny commercial. If you apply humor correctly in a campaign, it can work. Don't overdo it. Those are,
okay,
I've got nothing else to do.
Right. So by the way, Rudy Giuliani's son, can't remember his first name. It's either Andrew or Anthony. he actually did, he wants to run for governor, and he actually did use the statement that loosely or construed was, "It's my turn. My father was this and that." Of course, he's using the wrong role model. But let me just get just hone in on one issue.
Sure.
If somebody says, "I have some great ideas and I care about the city or township or district I'm living in," those are what you're saying are positive things. They could resonate well. But suppose somebody says, "I think that the current mayor or the council people are doing a horrible job, or they're too progressive, or they're not progressive enough, or whatever. I think they're doing a horrible job." That
Bad
is,
reason.
it's different than saying, "I care and I have some issues as well."
Right, because we had, Illinois, of course, one of the most corrupt states in the union. We had a governor candidate, Bill Brady. He fairly conservative, but a good guy. I met him and I warned him about his strategy, which was, I'm not the other guy. He wasn't Pat Quinn. And so he just laid low and thought, I can't lose this election as long as I shut up. Nope. Because he didn't define himself, he opened the door to Quinn's people defining him. They did, and he lost. We just had essentially a Geneva mayoral candidate run for a third time. He's a terrible candidate, but his entire platform is, I'm not the other guy. And it just doesn't work. You really have to have a horrific other guy to be able to make that kind of case. Now, it did happen in Sugar Grove here, but that's because the mayor tried to bring in a truck depot in the middle of the sleepy, high-end, fairly affluent city. And even though in the end he came out against it, he would have lost to, a dead person.
Okay.
So, but Mark, the other guy thing rarely works. You can say, I don't think they're doing a very good job, but then you better quickly follow it up with, and here's how I change it.
This is what I would do. Okay.
This is what I would do. This is what I would do differently.
Okay. So let's assume that somebody either hires a consultant like you, or they read your book and they can figure it out, and they take assessment of themselves and they say, yeah, I do have strong feelings about my contribution, what I can do. Here are some ideas that I think resonate well. I mean, I suppose they could do focus groups and find out what people really care about, but you can also just read letters to the editor and see what people care about.
Or you can get voter data. Anybody can get voter data from their local election authority, which is typically the county clerk. And you can see from primaries, it's not the best way of saying, at least in Illinois, and at least in our system. And you can see how many Republicans are voting and how many Democrats are voting. And though it's not as partisan on the local level, we had in my ward, oh God, problem is I forgot more about politics than most people remember, but I believe we're the 4th ward here in Geneva. And a woman was running and putting a lot of effort into it too, God bless her, on sustainability. Well, in Republican Geneva, sustainability doesn't resonate, and she went down in flames. So the first part is, yes, you said message, excellent, but it's got to resonate with the voters, and it's not too terribly difficult to find out what will and won't resonate. And I'm not saying, well, I got to, some candidates will tell the person at the door whatever they want to hear. I do not advise that or recommend it. But if you're a liberal and you're living in still conservative Geneva and you want to run, you might want to consider moving to a place where you could win.
Okay. So before they get out of the gate, and how early in the process, and I don't know whether it's covered in chapter 1, do you look at the skeletons or the potential skeletons in your closet? You've been divorced 3 times, you had an affair, you didn't pay your taxes 2 years in a row, you were involved in some tangential way in some Ponzi scheme. How do you, those people presumably should self-eliminate for the most part.
Well, no, not really. Not at the national level, it's far, statewide and national level, it's far worse, Mark. At the local level, people don't expect perfection. So, as I believe I put I believe it's the 1st or 2nd chapter, I say the bottom line is Whatever you've done is going to come out. And if you haven't done anything, they'll make it up. So you could rest assured, you'll be a white supremacist. You'll be a progressive loon. But if you've gone through those things and you say, like, I was advising a judge, one of my best friends, in a circuit court race. And, I advised her not to mention her opponent's DUI record because her opponent said the perfect thing. Hey, yeah, I got a couple DUIs in my lifetime, but I've learned from them. Mm-hmm. And it's going to make me a better judge. And I just, my eyes got real wide and I was like, oh boy. So at the local level, as long as you admit to it, own it, and flip it, if you can. Now, if you're a child molester or something, it's not going to happen. You can actually turn that into a huge advantage.
Well, do you advise folks that are seeking office that have one of those, somewhat tawdry things, but not exclusionary things, to anticipate and come out with it first, or to be ready when the opponent?
If it's relatively minor, like parking tickets, you don't have to, elicit your entire sordid history. But if it's something like a DUI, yeah, you want to bring it up. If it's something like a tax issue, oh my God, yes, you want to bring it up. In the case of my wife's friend that we previously discussed, though she's pretty conservative, she was the local union rep at her school. And I warned her, if you don't bring that out right away, they will hammer you with the fact that you're a teachers union rep. And that's one of the reasons she decided not to run for Congress. And she has since moved on from that gig because she does have political aspirations. So for the most part, yes, you can mitigate it by owning up to it up front. So
one of the exclusionary reasons that you point out is if your spouse doesn't want you to run. And
particularly if that spouse is a wife.
Okay.
If your husband doesn't want you to run, and most wives don't listen to their husbands anyway.
Right.
So, but if your wife doesn't want you to run, don't. And that's one of the first questions I ask when a candidate comes to me.
Okay.
Is your wife behind you? And if she isn't, it's not worth it. Mark, it's not worth the dissension, the resentment, because it's a campaign at the lowest level is a ton of work. There's a ton of knocking on doors.
And it's the whole family, as you point out to the book,
right,
actually running. But what about somebody who meets all the checks of, yes, I have good faith reasons. I know I did my due diligence. I know what resonates. My spouse is okay with it. I wasn't a child molester, but they have no money. Is that
that you can overcome the book mentions the MOM method: money, message, organization, and money. And by the way, I have to give credit to John Reeves, a political operative out of Oswego, Illinois, because he's the one that came up with that. And I stole it with his permission. But if you don't have money, then you need time. And Dave Rickert, our treasurer who just moved on to greener pastures, went up against the, Dallas Ingham and Denny Hastert machine here in Kane County with like no money. He spent $5,000 on a countywide treasurer campaign, but he knocked on about 25,000 doors and he won. So if you have time, you can, and particularly to knock on doors, you can offset the lack of money.
So sweat equity in a local election can substitute for having the money to hire people, but you still have to get signs. There's still money that you have to have somewhere. So maybe you have to take a second mortgage on your house, or talk to your parents.
You could, if you want to run for, state rep or state senate, yes. But if you want to run for even mayor of Geneva, you could do it effectively on $5,000.
Okay.
It's just knowing where the book describes, where do signs have the most effect, which door, it's kind of like, I don't know if I use this in the book, but who are you going to approach to vote for you? It's kind of like Victoria's Secret could send a bra catalog to men, and while they may well enjoy it, they're not going to buy a bra. And I think, oh, that's one thing that my wife's friend laughed her ass off about was, I don't even know my wife's bra size. So how can I buy her one? But it's a great analogy, because if you focus on your voters, you cut the field down. If you focus on, there's people who will vote for you, you ignore them. This is one of my biggest campaign secrets. And I'm telling you right now, because nobody listens. The people that will vote for you, you ignore them. Willie Brown on Politically Incorrect, the former mayor of San Francisco, once said, if you can't take their money and bleep them, you shouldn't be in the game. Then there's people who absolutely will not vote for you. Ignore them. It's those people in the middle that you could convince. And if you're running in a Geneva, it's a little more in a, if you're running in a Geneva ward for alderman, you don't have to knock on that many doors. It's a little more if you're running in Asheville. I don't know if they have an at-large system or if they have a ward aldermanic system. At-large meaning the entire city votes for all aldermen. But you'll find that, like Elgin, which is analogous to Asheville, 112,000 people. In local elections, at most, when the mayoral seat is at stake, 7,000 people in 5,600 households vote. And last time it was only 5,000, despite the massive turnout, in the Trump versus Biden election. So if you know this, and now you can kind of figure out the liberal and conservative areas, now you can cut it down. It's much more difficult to do at the state rep and state senate level, but you can still do it. So yeah, I mean, if you wanted to run for alderman of, Geneva, a city of 22,000 people in a ward, you could probably do it by knocking on 500, 600 doors. And you can certainly do that over the course of a campaign.
And when you say you can do it by knocking on doors, it's the candidate, the candidate's spouse, the candidate's best friends and colleagues. They can substitute.
I'd say it's the candidate.
It's the candidate themselves.
And I say in the book, you don't want your family, unless your family has nerves of steel, you don't want your family knocking for you, particularly your husband if you're running as a woman, because somebody at some front door is going to have their cell phone and they're going to say, your wife sucks. And the husband is going to go to defend them. And now it's on Facebook. Same thing with children. We have had a very successful aldermanic candidate. He has moved on here, use his family, but mostly he'll knock on doors. He'll have his son following with signs in the trunk of a car. If the conversation with the voter goes well, hey, can we put up a sign? And they put it up then and there. You can have your family organized to some degree, but you can't, it's really risky having them interface with voters. And never, ever, ever, ever ask your family for a truthful feedback. They won't give it to you, particularly, if it's the wife that's running. No husband wants to be celibate for the next 3 months. So don't even ask. Sorry for going off on that tangent. It's kind of funny, but it's true.
Okay. Again, for those of you just tuning in, this is The World According to Mark, and we're speaking with Jeff Ward, an author and political consultant, author of So You Want to Win a Local Election. All right. So we've gone through the beginning parts of your book.
And the most critical parts, by the way, you're dead on.
Okay. You have a section on, quote, getting started, which looks like a requirement to sort of know what the election cycle is, when there are elections. You also should know if you're running for a level of a precinct or a township or a county, right. You need to understand all of that stuff. That seems pretty, straightforward. Is there any interesting stories that you want to talk about?
Well, there are, the book is full of real world examples. I provide a lesson and then I provide a real world thing. And you'd think, well, who could screw that up? Well, when I was working for the county clerk, we had a kid running for precinct committeeman and none of the signatures came from within the precinct. I don't know North Carolina's rules, Mark, but here in Illinois, they make it really, really difficult to get on the ballot. And so you have to get signatures on nominating petitions. And this kid, not one. We've had people send mailers out of county. So yes, you need to know these things. You need to know where your boundaries are, or you could make an hellacious mistake, or you could hire a printer that makes an hellacious mistake. And the other thing too that's just a critical is you need to know who's in office, because George Pradle was the mayor in Naperville, city of 80,000 people for 20 years. And there was people that spent millions of dollars, literally, to try to unseat George Pradle. George was, back in the day, was an officer friendly for the Naperville police. And all those kids who grew up to have families remembered George. George, I ran a 5K race in Naperville. George saw them getting set to hand out the awards. He pulls in and starts handing out the awards. So I got my third place finish from Mayor Pradle. Nobody was going to, if God himself came down, nobody was going to beat George Pradle. So you have to pick, a possibility where you can actually win, or maybe you can set yourself up for a run when that person retires. But there's some people, especially in local politics, that have served 6, 7, 8, 9 terms. You're not going to beat them.
Okay.
Sorry for going off on that.
No,
but
no.
it's
So that's part of the, again, sort of the due diligence.
Right.
And I guess, let me ask you this question straight up. Do you think somebody can do what you're advocating to run choose a good spot, run a successful campaign, and win on your book alone? Or
yes,
you do. Okay.
If you're willing to understand what you don't know, that Zen concept, if you're willing to go, you know what, I really don't know, and you're open to it, you can do it on the book alone, following it step by step. Absolutely.
Okay. So you have a section called Getting the Paperwork Right. And you alluded to that one issue about not even knowing, some candidates not even knowing where they should go to get signatures.
Right.
But you have something, you have forms there, and you have the candidate's guide. You have a lot of different pieces there. Could you just give sort of a general quick summary of what that's about?
Particularly in the Rust Belt states, Michigan, Wisconsin, Illinois, Ohio, New York, Pennsylvania, you get on the ballot by securing signatures on nominating petitions. The number of signatures depend upon the people that voted in that race in the most previous election. And that's also fraught with peril. Typically, the local election authority will tell you how many signatures you need. And then you have to go to the district, throughout your district, getting those signatures. And the first thing you need to do is get double, at least, which isn't too terrible. In most aldermanic races here in Geneva, you need 40 signatures. So get 80. But even if you need, state rep races, 500, you probably want to get 1,500, because here in Illinois, at least, it is vast sport getting people kicked off the ballot for minor technicalities. It has greatly shifted, Mark, from 10 years ago. We are now finally leaning towards ballot access. But in Illinois, you can be thrown off the ballot for not binding your petitions correctly, meaning, stapling them in the right places. If you omit a page number or get a page number wrong in your stack of countywide petitions, everything after the error gets thrown out. And if you don't get the district right, if your circulator makes a mistake on the notary part, there's all sorts of means to get thrown off the ballot. And it used to happen with a lot more frequency. So in those northern states, you're probably going to want to run your paperwork by someone who's had some experience with this somewhere. Okay. And not the county clerk, because they have a sign up in their office that says the advice provided by our staff is by no means legal advice.
Okay.
Now, in southern states and California and the western states, you can just pay a fee to get on the ballot. Do it. And some places will waive the fee if you don't have the money. It's so much simpler than the paperwork and going through a nominating petition challenge, which is going to throw your campaign off because you have to pay complete attention to that.
So just sort of probably an obvious answer to this obvious question. If you're in a state where the effort to get nominated requires you to get signatures, we are obviously talking about, because you mentioned paperwork and stapling, we mean somebody has to go door to door, or
Right.
possibly could they show up at a PTA meeting, or is there,
Absolutely.
okay,
You can't show up at a political meeting because it may be illegal and it's also bad form. You can go to your local post office and stand in front. What I wouldn't do is go to your local Walmart, Target, or whatever, because most people aren't registered voters. Slim majority. So non-registered voters aren't going to help you. Most people don't know what district they're in. Out of district voters, signatures aren't going to help you.
so you
But
have
for
to
the
get
most
the
part,
list of the registered voters,
that's right. You go to your
and
local
that's
election
what, and
authority,
that's where you go.
and not only do you get his signature, but it's your initial introduction to that voter. Hey, I'm running.
Okay.
And if typically in local elections, all things considered equal, though they rarely are, Mark, the person who makes the most face-to-face contact wins.
So again, and that's obviously why, again, your recommendation is start local. It's small. You've indicated that it's not a money limiting thing if you're willing to put in the work,
Right.
but there is work. It's more or less a full-time job. Although,
Yeah. I mean, if you're going to run even for alderman in a
or city
medium-sized
council,
30,000 city, you're going to be knocking doors on weekends. You're going to be knocking on doors on weeknights. I mean, and if you have four small children, and you have a job that requires a bunch of overtime, don't run. And paying somebody to do all that stuff, as a candidate here in Geneva tried to do for a mayoral race, that doesn't work.
okay. Another section that you talk about in the book is entitled "Kicking Off the Campaign."
Mm-hmm.
And you begin it with a discussion about what is considered a campaign and what isn't. And you go into then connecting with potential voters, the whole campaign process. Can you give us a little background on that, and also maybe a good story?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, a campaign isn't making grand gestures. I mean, to some, in national politics, it's true. It takes 1,000 things to win it and one thing to lose it. But even in local elections, it's not that bad unless something comes out that you didn't pay your tax bill or whatnot, and you didn't get ahead of it. But a campaign isn't, preaching to the choir. And that's what so many people, they get hung, there's a lot of camaraderie. Most of these candidates, most of these elected officials are utterly dysfunctional. And it comes out once they're elected. But during campaign season, everybody's everybody else's best friend because everybody wants everybody else's help. Preaching to the choir isn't going to get you elected. Sitting back and throwing bombs at your opponent, we've discussed it, not going to get you elected. I mean, campaigning requires good messaging delivered primarily by you, the candidate, directly to the voter's face. That's a campaign. And just like we just discussed, getting signatures, you can turn that into a campaign effort. A fun fundraiser, great campaign effort. It's a party and you get people together, and that's how you constantly have to think about it.
So let me ask you this question. You're
Sure.
talking about a lot of personal contact. Personal contact is required. FaceTime is required, connecting with the voter. But we're living in an era of, virtual media. We're doing a virtual media thing right now
Correct.
through a Zoom broadcast, but people use Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and a bunch of other platforms. Does any of that work, or is any of that effective in a local campaign?
Now it is. But if you had asked me that question a year and a half ago, I would have said, yeah, social media can do far more damage than it can help. People don't take it seriously. Yes, you have to have a campaign presence, but it's an adjunct. Get a high schooler to do your social media for you, and they'll do a great job. Well, then COVID hit. And I really, I surmised this, sadly, I had 3 Republican candidates lose. You can't reach out to voters who never voted before. It's very difficult. But I noted that the 2 of my candidates that lost, one by 2,000 votes and one by 3,000 votes out of 150,000, 200,000 votes cast, I forced them. I was relentless. I call myself a Jewish mother campaign manager in getting them to do social media. The third one couldn't figure it out. I thought he was safer than he was, and he lost by about 15,000 votes. So that taught me now, the post-ish COVID era, social media is incredibly meaningful, but it's got to be, it's not, it's hard to describe what I want to say. Typically with social media, you want to engender the kind of thing like, you know what, I'm going to vote for the candidate I'm most like to have a beer with. And so Mark and his family, Mark and his wife enjoying time, Mark shaking hands with happy voters, Mark talking with a bunch of school children. That's where social media truly shines. And to some degree, if the race really is a hot button issue race, which is a loaded question, or the issues matter because the people are unhappy with the incumbent, you can use it to convey that too. But you have to be careful. There's a whole section on social media. You don't want to get into censorship, but you also don't want to let your opponent will have people come on and just try to throw you completely off with comments and whatnot. And you have to dispense with those folks rather quickly. At the local level, it's hard to tell. But social media going forward, and it's always mattered in national, Mark, because you can't hit every door in national and statewide. But social media going forward is going to have a lot more impact. And any campaign manager or candidate who doesn't understand that is going to lose.
So what about other ways of getting the word out and getting your name out? I mean, candidates can come on the radio, candidates can write op-eds to the newspaper,
letters to the editor,
they can have a barbecue. And then there's the whole issue of debating and whether or not that's effective, can be used, difficult, whatever, and you're shaking your head.
Again, the best way to get your name out is door to door. The second best way is social media. The third best way is friend to friend cards, where you have your friends, you give a friend 20 stamped postcards with a pre-printed note, or maybe they'll write their own note, and they send it to 20 of their friends. And that even works at the state rep and state Senate level. So those are the best ways. Radio can work depending upon the listenership. Older people vote. Older people still tend to listen to radio. Getting your name in the newspaper, the people still to some degree read local newspapers, doesn't hurt, but nothing replaces knocking on doors, and social media is going to get even more critical at this point.
But you shook your head on when I used the word debate. And now debates tend to be arranged affairs by
Correct.
The League of Women Voters or some other medium. And sometimes I've noticed here that somebody coming up against an incumbent cannot even get the incumbent to engage in doing a debate because that incumbent is going on his or her record and they don't feel like they have to, and that participating in debate can only be negative for them.
That's right. And the thing is, it's preaching to the choir. Look, if you get invited to a debate, you have to go as a candidate because your opponent will use that against you. He or she were too scared to even show up. But, sadly, in the COVID era, as I was coaching my candidates, through the 20 geez, I forget the years, election, I would watch the local cable TV station, their YouTube channel, and they would tell you how many people were watching the debate. And I was disgusted. I mean, you're talking countywide candidates who are going to have a huge impact on your tax bill. And there would, at most, would be 67 people watching. And now, although the thing is, if they actually did have an audience, there'd be even less people. But debates allow you to hone your skills as political communication skills. It typically will get in the newspaper. And if you do a good job, it'll get in. If you totally screw up, it'll get in. And it provides some recognition, but not nearly what you'd think. I mean,
But if you combine it with social media, you could have a debate, have somebody taping it, or you can get it from a local television station
right.
if they're covering it. And if you say something terrific, you as a candidate can broadcast that on Facebook.
Correct. Now,
And if your opponent says something stupid, you want to use that presumably too.
Correct. But you have to edit it. Most debates, particularly when you're working your way up to the countywide and state rep, state senate level, are at least 30 minutes to an hour. And nobody's going to sit through that long. So you would have to edit it down. And yes, now with the emergence of social media as a real local political tool, it could make a difference. Now you got to, and I would not recommend cutting it so your opponent sounds like an idiot, because they'll then return fire and you'll look like an idiot.
Well, they might do that anyhow.
That can make a difference. Yeah, that can make a difference. But and the jury's still out on what effect social media is really going to have once we head back to the non-COVID era. But before, we were all locked down, the only people that came to your Facebook page were either your ardent supporters or your worst, nightmares. And it just doesn't go anywhere. It was a proposition fraught with peril. And to get into a debate with one of your opponent's supporters, no good can come from it. Okay. Zero.
So let me get into something. We have several minutes, but let me just sort of get into something which seems mundane to me, but that is signs, SIGNS. Mm-hmm. One of the candidates who was successful on a statewide basis, he had millions of signs, it would appear. His opponent, negligible number. The signs don't say anything. They used to say, vote for Joe Smith, the heart of the conservatives, or, whatever. Mm-hmm. But lately they don't seem to say anything except they give the name.
To be honest, they shouldn't, but go ahead.
So the question is, well, are they still important?
Oh, absolutely. In and of themselves, there is, other than door knocking, face to face, in and of itself, there is no single endeavor, no single effort that's going to win you the election. A reasonable signage effort is the sign of a well-run campaign. Millions of signs, sometimes that actually backfires. We had a candidate here, and I warned him, putting 8x4 signs on people's front lawns. Well, that horked off all the rest of the neighbors, and he got 34% of the vote. So, but well-placed signs just are another step in the process to getting elected. And by well-placed, I mean neighbors, front lawns.
Right.
Voters' front lawns, because humans tend to exist on a herd mentality. Hey, Jim's going to vote for Frank. Jim's a good guy. I'm going to vote for Frank.
Or people go to the ballot box and they know nothing about the candidates, but they remember seeing a sign.
A sign in a neutral location, it's all right. A neutral location, a 4x4 sign on a busy street corner, that's not going to get you elected. It's if you don't have much name recognition, it can help, but it's not the be all and end all. But the candidate who gets the most good sign locations generally does better. Signs matter, and they shouldn't say anything, because saying something only allows people to immediately dismiss you. No voter wants to do the work of the issues and your background. They just want a reason to say, not him. Right. And so you don't want to put anything. And the truth is, Mark, whether it's a campaign mailer or a sign, the theory's the same. Campaign mailer, you want to get them to read your name in the 10 seconds it takes to get from the mailbox to the recycling bin. A sign, you want to get them to see your name as they drive by it at 35, 40 miles an hour. That's it. You could just put your, Lieberman, although again, you might want to shorten your name if you're going to run. Lieberman, and it would work just the same thing as a mailer. It would work just as well. All you're trying to do is beat that 5-second voter ADHD to get that name in their heads. That's it. So yes, signs matter. A lack of signs will certainly hurt you.
So in a few minutes, we haven't talked specifically about fundraising. You mentioned don't get the candidate, him or herself, has to make personal contact, but there still is such a thing as having volunteers, even volunteers to put the signs out there. So what can you tell people about the importance of fundraising?
Well, at the hyper local level, and somewhat even up to state rep and state senate, kind of the ceiling of the book, I joke about the magic $100 that just rotates. The same people get invited to the fundraisers and they pay $100, but then they expect you to pay $100 to theirs, and nobody actually makes money. There's one former candidate here in Illinois that could hold a fundraiser, Porky Picnic, Chris Lausen, former state senator, former county chairman, and he could get 800 people to show up. But Chris spent 20 years building his constituency and doing it incredibly well. Fundraising, it's a party to get folks inspired, to find volunteers, to get signs out there, but that's all it is. Unless you really have great, wealthy contacts, you're not going to get a lot of money fundraising at the local level, and even if it's overly contentious. So you once again have to, resort to time. And that's why, Jim Oberweis was my local. I don't know if you guys have heard that name. He's run nationally, for U.S. Senate. But, Jim is a wealthy man. And I mean, he lost about 5 or 6 elections. He lost 5 or 6 elections, but his money finally served him well. And there are some folks that do get enough money to run, but you tend to get those contributions, the kind that can build up to $50,000 to $100,000 once you are elected. Once you're a county chairman, once you're a state senator, well, nobody wants to aggravate you, and it's much easier to fundraise. At the local level, unless you're really, really good at it, you're not likely going to pull in a lot of money.
So let me ask you, we just have a little bit of time left.
Mm-hmm.
Let me ask you one question. Is the best way for somebody to get elected to local office to run for office and lose, which is, the most likely thing if they've never done it before, and then run again?
Yes, most candidates lose their first election. But you have to be careful, Mark, because prior to the 24/7 news cycle, and even local, because, Facebook, guys like Jack Cunningham, our county clerk, or Jim Oberweis, our former state senator, lost 6, 7 elections. You can't do that anymore. You can't do that. You get branded as an also ran, and it's very, very difficult to win the 5th or 6th time. It happens, and we've had it happen a couple times here recently, but it's exceedingly rare. So you want to be careful. You want to pick a race you can at least do well in. But then, yes, if you do that with the right message in the right district, you can set yourself up to win the second run. It happens all the time.
So run a good campaign, select wisely, and then run again. And
if you lose, you have to get past the demoralization. How could I possibly, people don't take losing campaigns well.
Thanks, Jeff Ward.
Well, thank you for having me, Mark. This was a blast.
Okay, terrific. And I want to thank my producer, Focus Solutions, Shelley Lieberman. We'll see you all next time.
Thank you, sir.